Are you a cynic or are you hopeful? Do you believe that people are trustworthy or fundamentally deceptive? Altruistic or self-serving? Do we fight for a better world, for freedom, for democracy, for beloved community because we think we can win, see evidence that the moral arc of the universe is bending that way with our help? Or just because it's the right thing to do, though we're destined for failure? Does it depend on the day? I haven't been shy about the fact that I got pretty despondent after November 2024 elections. You all know the story of Noah and how after God destroyed all of humanity except for a few of Noah's righteous family and reproducing pairs of living things kept alive on the ark, how God regretted, according to the story, the wholesale destruction of what God's self had created and promised not to do it again, and put a rainbow in the sky to mark that promise, the covenant, that great word we love to use, that promise of the heart to us that it wouldn't happen again. After November 2024, with wholesale murder seemingly unstoppable playing out in Ukraine and Israel and Gaza, let alone the ongoing oppressions around the world, the growing disparities of wealth, and all the other ways that things like trust and health and joy were being diminished. Well, I, in a dark night of the soul, or two or three, found myself saying a quiet little conversation with God that went something like, "Take back your rainbow and let the storms rage. Go back to the drawing board, O Holy One, and this time let's leave human beings out of the mix." Anyone ever felt that way? Depending on the day. Why bother? I wonder, why bother to try and build up things that take years and decades and lifetimes to create? To watch as we have some ignoramus tear them down and celebrate like a toddler who has knocked down a tower of blocks and thinks that knocking down is an accomplishment. It's the building up that matters, that takes endurance, holy persistence, and genius. Why bother, then, in a world of toddlers to try and rebuild? Ever felt that way? Does it depend on the day? Growing up in the Unitarian Church of All Souls in New York City, the senior minister was Forrest Church. Forrest was the son of Senator Frank Church of Idaho, who served that state as its senator for, I think, 24 years. Frank was a mold of states person that I yearn to see more of. I hope they didn't break the mold. He was the first to speak out against Vietnam and passed legislation to curtail the war, though initially he had been a supporter of it. Himself an Army veteran of World War II who left Stanford to go and serve. He was key in the creation of a system of protected wilderness areas with the passage of the National Wilderness Act of 1964 and the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act of 1968. A hero of an era with a legacy that still blesses us. Raised in Idaho in that family, Forrest went to serve this Upper East Side of New York congregation, a congregation that was of largely educated, formally educated, largely professional, largely financially successful parishioners. There were many artists and thought leaders too. And in this congregation, Forrest saw and named continually a social malaise that he saw among his people and people like them. Sophisticated resignation, he called it, and chic cynicism. People, he said, who knew so much about the problems that they felt resolved in doing nothing. Does that feel familiar? In your own mind or heart, do you feel that way? Do you see it in the world? But what he said then, and what I want to remind us today, like a periodic shot in the arm, a booster, is how and why we are people of hope. If you are from this religious family, born to it or you've chosen it, you have chosen to be part of, or you were born into a hopeful people. Unitarians and Universalists, before they joined forces in 1961, had that hopefulness in common. They believed in the world's possibilities and invested in them. They believed, we believe, in the goodness at the heart of the universe. The goodness planted in each human being. Originally, it found its foundation in eschatological language that we would all be saved. Though why we would all be saved, they disagreed slightly about. Speaking about that difference, Thomas Starr King, one of our first ministers, summarized the two positions this way, saying, "The Universalists think God is too good to damn them, while the Unitarians think they are too good to be damned." Either way, a hugely loving God pumping her power into the world, and who planted the seed of all that loving God power in us, or both, made us hopeful, gave us a good chance, if we connected to it all, of seeing love and goodness and mercy and truth prevail. We weren't and we aren't alone in that philosophical and theological set of commitments. Among our interfaith ancestors of hopefuls is, just one of them, Mencius, the foremost Neo-Confucian scholar whose life spanned the 4th to the 3rd centuries before the Common Era. Mencius thought that all people were, and he used this metaphor, born with sprouts of virtue in us, which if tended, if practiced in a life, would mature into fully grown benevolences. He thought those sprouts, from his observation, were incredibly resilient. But he also acknowledged that enough neglect and abuse could force them to wither and die or be uprooted irreparably. Like Mencius, our ancestors also agreed that this human instinct for good, that it could also be perverted, it could be thwarted. It was why, actually, we committed to be in the world so boldly, to support in particular institutions that would support human flourishing as we understood it to be served and nurtured. And that meant things like humane and deeply thoughtful institutions of higher learning, penal systems that emphasized rehabilitation, social systems that minimized poverty, and that included trusting people with the vote so that their wisdom could help define the whole of the world, which also gave them a stake in the world, in a belief in the open marketplace of ideas so that no ignorant idea could claim the stage without being tested and held accountable. So much about how we do church is because of how we hope to form the world. It's our training ground here for what we think builds hope and spiritual strength. And I think if we double down on all those commitments among those are the ones I just named rather than eroded them in the world, we'd see more reasons for hope. Do you agree? All those sprouts of virtue would be watered and protected to grow deep and tall. If you don't agree with what I just said, that we're planted with these innate goodnesses, that if the world were created to support our flourishing, that they would come to these full benevolences like Mencius described. If you don't believe what our theological and philosophical ancestors believed, and you're firmly planted in cynicism, or at least teetering in that direction, then the rest of the sermon is for you. It's the non-theological, worldly, science-based argument for why we have reason to hope, and to encourage you to choose hope for your own sake, too. Ready? Jamil Zaki is a professor of psychology at Stanford. Stanford, by the way, started by the Stanfords who were members here. But anyway, we'll do more of that later. Zaki's primary focus has been to study empathy and kindness, but he's also, he says, a self-proclaimed kind of cynic. And he had a beloved colleague, Émile Bruneau, who was anything but a cynic, though in his own life he had many reasons that he could have teetered in that direction. And Émile passed away very young, in his 40s, of brain cancer. And in response to it, in service of his grief and Émile's legacy, Zaki digs into the life and study that was so dear to his friend, the study and living out of hopefulness. The book, he writes, is called Hope for Cynics, The Surprising Science of Human Goodness. And it's also a really good inoculation for fending off creeping cynicism. So, let's talk for a minute about the life of a cynic. If you think being a cynic protects you from hurt, disappointment, strengthens you for life, maybe saves you the stress of worry, you'd be wrong. Zaki writes at the beginning of chapter 2 of the book, if cynicism were a pill, its warning label would list depression, heart disease, and isolation. In other words, it would be poison. Cynics, it turns out, report higher levels of loneliness, and loneliness, as former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy yelled from the media rooftops, is a public health disaster. Cynics drink more, earn less money, and die younger. So if it's bad for you, Zaki asks, why do so many of us swallow it? He thinks maybe it's because there are these myths that lure us in, that confirm the wisdom of cynicism. The first one is that cynics are more intelligent than the hopeful, more rational, that they are also more pragmatic and grounded in reality. It's a myth that by implication would say that the hopeful among us are, in contrast, a bit naive, a bit unwilling to analyze the data and face the truth. There's a myth also among them that says that cynics are socially smarter than the hopeful among us, that they can suss out the cheaters and the liars faster, maybe because they're so actively scanning the horizon for them. The summary is the sense that it might be a harder, harsher way to live as a cynic, but that it's the price we pay for being right, for being clear-eyed, able to face the world on its terms and live into what it requires of us. However, Zaki writes, in studies of over 200,000 individuals across 30 nations, cynics scored less well on tasks that measure cognitive ability, problem solving, and mathematical skills. And they scored less well than non-cynics in detecting liars. Cynicism, Zaki says, looks smart, but it isn't. Scientists, when they're talking among themselves about these things, have called it the cynical genius illusion. And cynics, by trusting less, actually make the world less trusting, because it turns out that the average person responds badly to not being trusted. And it also turns out, just for all of us to know, that the average person underestimates the average person. It's like we all wear some form of a glass, often that underestimates our fellow human beings, but when we do, and to the extent we underestimate or suspect each other, we invest less in them, we risk less, we reach out less, and therefore we undermine the chance to build the best world and relationships among us. When you are a cynic, when we are cynical, we make the world worse. Our choice to be a cynic in moments or in our lives is part of the problem, in other words. Zaki encourages us to embrace what I think actually you were getting at a little bit in your reflection, Carmen, not the opposite, not some naive, trusting, hopeful stance that's pie in the sky about what sometimes happens in the world, but what he calls a kind of hopeful skepticism. The hopeful skeptic assumes that people mean the best, that they will generally do good and be selfless, unless proven otherwise, and is awake and open to evidence when it arises. Skeptics are always open to new information, and that stance seems to correct about all the errors that the cynic can fall prey to. For instance, whereas cynics, I love this, were more likely to fall for conspiracy theories, skeptics were less prone to these stumbles. So hope is the wise, intelligent choice, the practical one, the socially astute one, the healthy one. I'd encourage us all, just thinking about this as we go out into our lives after this time together, to practice looking for signs of hope if we don't already do that. If we feel cynical, take the dark glasses off. You don't have to put rose-colored ones on, just put the clear ones on. Start a notebook or a note in your phone memo app for signs of hope, for people doing good, showing how they're worth trusting. Maybe we should start a bulletin board of hope. Power lift hope to failure, to build the muscle. So here's the last mini chapter of my case for hope. Here are a few pieces of evidence I found just this week. This week, in the Twin Cities, people by the hundreds paid their neighbors rent, those who could not go to work for fear of being detained, and brought groceries to their immigrant neighbors, organized neighborhood watches, and just in Minneapolis has been nominated for the 2026 Nobel Peace Prize, a move that marks the second time an entire city has been put forward. Kenya this week announced it will reopen its border with Somalia, a border that was closed in October of 2011 following a surge in attacks by the Al-Shabaab in Kenya, a group that was based in Somalia and coming across the border to attack. So it will be the first time in 15 years there's been open movement and trade between the two nations. In California, long hazardous oil wells in South LA were finally plugged, and major state reservoirs reached their highest level in years, boosting water security. And the wood stork, a large native wading bird common to the southern United States that was listed as endangered in 1984, as of February 9th, 2026, was removed from the US endangered species list because its numbers have so significantly rebounded. Yesterday was Valentine's Day, a celebration in part of the leaps of trust and risk that people make for love. And in our chapel, in front of 75 family members and friends, Bruce Clements and Carol Fleming, both members of this church who met here, were married. Bruce is in his 90s, Carol is in her 80s. Next week, Jim Valent, 87, member of this church, will marry his longtime friend, soon-to-be wife, Patty Melvin. Jim, who was a medic in Vietnam and saw some of the worst, still believes in love. Finally, this. Today, approximately 140 people set their alarms, most of them showered and dressed appropriately, all of them dressed appropriately, found their way to 1187 Franklin Street in San Francisco to sit with people, some of whom, maybe many of whom they don't know, to listen to a service about hope, to deepen their commitment to the common good and try to leave the world a little better. Others were tuning in from all over the world to be part of the gathering. No one is sure where the cynics are gathering, but it isn't clear if there's anything more sweet or joyful or hopeful or fundamentally human than this gathering. Forrest Church prayed in one of his last public prayers before he died of esophageal cancer. He prayed, "Let us awaken from the soul-crushing allures of sophisticated resignation and cynical chic, to savor instead the world of abundance and possibility. We are a people who believe in hope. And why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't we?" Amen.